thanks for having me here. This is awesome. I think we've been talking about this for over a year, maybe even longer than that. But as I kind of started embarking on this dream of becoming a speaker, this is the kind of events I enjoy. I love speaking. I love prepping for it. I love doing all this stuff, and seeing great faces like Derek again definitely makes things all worthwhile. So I appreciate everything and you guys having me here. When Clay first approached me with this, it was, what am I going to talk about? You know, what's the things? What are the lessons? I literally, you heard my bio, I could tell you 5,000 stories. You guys could go straight to sleep. But there's something about leadership, and within, you know, kind of this kind of size group, there's so many lessons learned, especially from going to combat. I could tell you tons of different stories, and so I have to actually pare it down to find out what specifically do we want to talk about. Generally, I'm going to open up with this really interesting story. We know this story well. In fact, when they write a book about your unit, you know some things bad kind of happened with it. But when they make a mini series about your unit, you know it was not a good time. It was not fun. And that's what's recently happened with our unit when we were deployed to Iraq. I got to go see this set up at Fort Hood, and it just brought all these memories back, except for the trash, the goats, and the sewage. And besides that, it looked just like the site there. And to describe Sadr City to people is so foreign. It's so, to understand that 2.5 million people were inside of a 8 block by 8 block radius, basically a square. Think of 8 blocks and just think about how many people. It was common for most of us platoon leaders to have about 300,000 people in our little areas of responsibility. It was a lot of people. And so this specific mission that we had, it was on April 4th, 2004, is called Black Sunday in Sadr City. And it's something that is just tough to believe that literally what I call 15 minutes into our job, this is what happened to us, what went on. So at 6 o'clock, we have a transfer of authority from the previous unit, and then 15 minutes later, we're in one of the worst firefights. In fact, it is claimed as the worst day or bloodiest day in the history of the Iraq War so far. I don't think there will be any other like it. I hope there's not. But this specific day, the details, there's so many of them, so I'm going to try to get those down there. There's a pinned down platoon that's in the city, and all I know from my perspective is we need to go get these guys out of the city. That's all I know. And as we line up and start getting ready, we were told it was this peaceful mission. It was not going to be that big of a deal. And as we started to make our way down the road, I hear one of the other platoon sergeants yell out, "Contact right." And to me, that changed my entire life. In fact, I said, "What's wrong with Sergeant Butler? Like, nobody's shooting at us. They can't." And then I heard it. And I knew my entire life was going to change from that moment on. It was from the alleyways, from windows, from the rooftops, from every specific angle that they could shoot at us. And it's very tough to understand that there's only 100 or so folks that actually went out on that mission, and there were thousands in the city attacking us. The best image you can imagine is really Black Hawk Down, that kind of scenario. If you're in your mind, there's burning tires, there's people at every specific spot. As we start to head into the city, again, from every which way we're getting shot at, rocket-propelled grenades, you can only imagine. And as a bullet goes past my face and off the front windshield, I hear somebody, my driver, yell, "Sir, I've been hit." And in such slow motion as you can possibly imagine this, I look over at my driver, and he's got a bullet lodged right in his helmet. And when it's lodged in there, if you've never seen this before, it spreads out and it's shredded everywhere, and he's doing just fine. And people were, he did. He kept driving with his left hand, and I looked over, and he was taking out people in the alleyway with his right hand. He was shooting them. That's what kind of people that were sitting next to me that day. It's crazy. Of course, he ended up getting a Bronze Star with Valor. Sergeant Pineda, unbelievable NCO that we had there. As we start to head further into the city, there's so much firepower coming at us. We can't even go more than a couple blocks, and we have to take this turn. And nothing's scarier when you go to make a turn and all of that's coming at you and you see an empty vehicle. When you see an empty vehicle on a deployment, something's really bad. Something happened at that point, and I had no idea what was going on because we're going in, we're just trying to find this platoon. And when you see it, it's an empty vehicle. It's one of those images I can't replace in my mind. The doors are open, there's blood everywhere, and there's no soldier or officer to be found. Later I found out that the driver of my company commander at the time had been killed right in that spot as soon as they made that turn, and the company commander had to escape by foot. The vehicle was no longer working, and so was the lieutenant behind him, who ended up getting shot as well. To define at this moment, that day we ended up having 8 people killed in action, and we ended up, the last number that I know is about 70 wounded in action. So if you think about the numbers I just told you, a little over 100 something of us, let's call it even 150, went out against thousands of people, and we lost half of them to wounded or killed in action. It was the craziest day, and as we go past that vehicle, all of our tires have been shot. We're running on run flats at 5 miles an hour. There's no way to get out of the city because everybody's blocking the alleys. Everybody's all over the place. We finally make our way up a little bit down that route, and we take a right just to get back to reconsolidate. We still had not even seen the pinned down platoon at this point. We make the right, and I thought all was going to be good. The guy behind me, his rifle got shot out of his hand, and then as we're about to get on the road and be back to the forward operating base, in the last few seconds I hear ding ding, and sure enough, my gunner who was standing in the back hit in the calf, and he was wounded as well. I had never seen anything like that, not in a movie, not anywhere, and that was the moment I actually knew that things didn't go well. I didn't know anything before that. I was out there just trying to survive at that point. But there was something, not knowing what was going to go on, I knew we had a great team. I knew we had a great unit. We were very cohesive. You can look around the room, I can see how you guys interact with each other. When you see that kind of cohesiveness, it's impressive, not just in the military as well, but when you see it in companies, and I go to a lot of companies and speak, and you can sometimes see it and sometimes you can't. I think here, as you look around the room, you can see there's that closeness and interaction. You guys have been working for a while, some shorter than others, but you can kind of tell those things. So the 3 things that I want to talk about today that really you can apply while you're being here is talking about team building. That's one of the top things. It seems like that's what you guys are doing today. Talk about peer leadership and some of you working with each other, maybe as the same levels. And then the final thing to really talk about leadership as well is to be a mentor and to be a leader to junior folks or people who are on your team that you work with. It's not, and none of those three things are easy. None of them. To build a team, to work with each other as the same level leaders, and working with junior folks and none of that's easy. It's all very difficult in its own right. But I'm glad I got to sit in on your guys' testing that you guys did. There's something, if you guys look at it and you're doing testing for your job and you're thinking about it, but I looked at it as a completely different manner. The way that Buddy showed that if you mix compound A with compound B, or if you use something that's not right, it's not going to be adhesive. I look at team building the same exact way. If you don't do the right thing, A, or do the right thing, B, and you don't mix that together, well, your teams aren't going to be close. In combat, your teams aren't going to work well together. And like Clay had mentioned, he had already done that groundwork for me, which made me hopefully a better leader the year after I took his platoon. But he had already been working with those guys that I took over by mixing the right compounds, by making that team adhesive. And when I took them over, I got to work with them for a year. And that was one of the greatest things. I had a year before our deployment to do all the right things, to mix that all together and make sure that when we were tested, that we stood strong. And that day, that April 4th, we stood really strong. And I think beyond April 4th, I'm going to tell you some more stories that happened there. These are some of the strongest people that I've ever met. Some of my soldiers, other people I worked with, peers, It didn't matter. But it all started with that team building that Clay did the year before me. One of the stories is humorous, but it's not humorous, is when we went on a mission to go capture this high-value target, and it was late at night, and I can't believe that the military intelligence folks gave me the wrong house. That was something they never did. That's a joke. They always did. Because our intelligence there relied on other people, and you can imagine. So as we're taking a bunch of fire during this high-value target mission that we're going to go to, they're like, it's over there. They give me the new target where we're going to, the next house. And I looked at the squad behind me. I was like, all right, guys, we got to get to that other side. And there's about 5 of them. And the first guy goes, well, after you. And as we take off, I take off running, and I go as fast as I can. In fact, even with all my equipment on, it was probably my fastest 40-yard dash I've ever done in my life, was across this huge open field. And I didn't have to be that fast. I just had to be faster than the bullets being shot at me. That's all I had to do, just beat those things. And when I got to the other side to get this, next target, that house, I honestly thought I was going to turn around and nobody be there. I honestly thought that. Not that I was that fast, okay? I was not that fast, but that was a lot. I mean, that's a lot to ask guys to go do that. And as soon as I got to the house, all 5 of them were standing right behind me. That taught me a lot about leadership and building a team. The first thing it taught me about, I had to lead by example. You can't be a leader, you can't be a manager, you can't even be a subordinate if you don't lead by example, by doing the right thing all the time. Because they're never going to listen to what you say, they're only going to look at what you do. So think about that. Leading by example, we've all heard that before. But back to the team building thing, the next thing I really learned was I built trust. I built trust every second I could once I took the platoon from Clay. I built it while we did our training missions. I built it when we used to go out and have beers together. I built that trust over that short time period through missions we had done. But building trust, as we all know, takes a lifetime. It takes a lifetime to continuously build trust with everybody. And you can only take seconds to lose it. Some of us may know that we've done that with friends or family, a lifetime of building trust with somebody, and we said something or we did something and lost that trust in a matter of seconds. So when you're a leader or you're a manager, think about that. You're leading by example. You've got to build that trust. You consistently build that trust with every action that you have. And finally, I had to sacrifice my own well-being over the soldiers. Every single time, every single mission. That meant, if it meant sacrificing myself for them, I would do it. If that meant I had to stay up later or I had to get up earlier, whatever it meant that it was better for my soldiers, I would do that. Their well-being was always more important to me than my own. That has never changed. As a leader, as a manager, as I've done this, I learned those 3 things from just that one specific mission. And it's so crazy. The outside parts of that mission, it doesn't matter. It was just that one little action of having to run across sewage when bullets are flying and just making sure that those 5 guys are following me. That was team building. It started with the training that I had to do, with every mission, and every time we did anything, I built that team over and over. And when I was speaking to one of my NCOs just on the way up here yesterday, he's like, our platoon was so great that even when the guy after me took over, he's like, it's like we just kept having great officers every single time for them, but they didn't realize that it was themselves that made the platoon great. I was like, you guys got spoiled. You had Clay Spicer, you had me, and then had Payne after me. I was like, no wonder you guys had it so easy all the time. But they really enjoyed that, and building that time. We're talking about 2004 and 2005, and I can call these guys up anytime, and they're still on my team. They'll always be on my team. I was enlisted before I ended up going to West Point, and even then at 19, and I was the highest of classes of privates, which is private first class, which is kind of a joke because privates are the lowest of the enlisted folks. But I ended up getting to be in charge of this platoon. And there was 40 people in this platoon, and the ranks were E1 to E4, and the ages ranged from 19 to 40 something. And the drill sergeants put me in charge of this platoon as a platoon guy. And I gave one of the most ludicrous speeches of all time, as you can imagine, at 19, that I remembered so well that I was like, I will never say that in front of my platoon when I'm an officer. That's how bad this speech was, and I'll tell it to you right now. The speech was, I walked up with so much cockiness and confidence that I just looked him in the eyes. I was like, if anybody doesn't listen to what I say, I'm going to give you a memorandum for record, which is MFR, basically demerits, if you call it. I was like, and if you don't want to listen to it, that's fine. I was like, but if you do listen to everything I say, we'll just get along okay. I hear somebody at the end of this speech laugh and go, we're not listening to you, because I hadn't built a team with him. I hadn't built trust with him. And as soon as I said that, the platoon just kind of disintegrated. Like, I didn't say dismissed. I didn't say there. Just everybody walks away from me and just does whatever they want. Because I thought, because I had the position, I could just say and do whatever I want. In case of any of you have been in that kind of position where you thought the same thing and then you tried to do that and it failed on you, good, because that's exactly what should happen. You can't just come in to be a peer leader of people. You can't just come in and say, hey, we're the same age, we're the same rank, but because I may be this much higher than you or whatever it is, I'm going to talk to you like you're dirt. You can't do that to people. And there was three things that I kind of think about when I had to work with peer leaders. Luckily, we had such a great group of officers in that unit. It wasn't difficult because we were all there for the greater good. That's one of the things. When you work peer-to-peer with people, you're always working for the greater good of the company, of the unit, whatever it is. And that was one of the things that I learned even at 19, that I had to work for the greater good of everybody, not just for myself. The next thing I had to do, I had to listen. When you're working with other peers, you just listen to them. Whether they're going to rant or complain or do whatever, don't interject. Just let people do what they do. It's kind of like in a good marriage when you understand that your spouse or the other person, they just want to talk, and you don't have to offer advice. You don't. They just want somebody to hear what they're saying. It's the same thing in peer-to-peer leadership. When you're working with each other and somebody's talking for 10, 15 minutes and our attention spans are basically 40 seconds, and that's all we've got to give, but let that person talk. It's amazing when you think about that. You listen, you work for the greater good. But then finally, the one thing of peer-to-peer leadership that, I always thought of, how can I help that person? Although, like Clay's position and the executive officer in my company, although the rank was higher, it was always that kind of thought going, how do I help them? How do I make their job easier? Not everybody has that mentality, and that's why I'm telling you now that when you're working with peers, you got to think about, how can I actually help them? When you have somebody and you're basically the same rank and you're trying to just get them to do their own job, is so difficult. But if you keep that mentality in your mind saying, how can I help that person? It's night and day, because it goes back to that first point. It's for the greater good of the group. And that's what you do. How can I help each other? And it's more sales, it's more revenue, it's more whatever. But it's a better environment to work together when you think of that way. But on Mother's Day, we knew, again, that from sites and pictures that we had, we looked in the city, there was tires burning, there was people hiding. It was going to be a pretty bad event. And I went out twice that day in Bradley's. The first part was bad. The second mission was bad. And let me just tell you some of the numbers for that day. So that day at the camp itself, we ended up getting, I want to say 76 mortars. That number's been back and forth.
86.
86, 76, 2006, it doesn't matter. That was a lot of mortars. So you couldn't even walk to go eat without mortars landing somewhere around you. It was a bad day. And that was just on the camp. The Bradleys I took out for the two missions, I ended up getting hit with 30 rocket-propelled grenades that day in two different Bradleys. I don't know if you know what it feels like to be inside a Bradley when a rocket propelled grenade hits it. But have you guys have been on some roller coasters where it's like those old wooden ones and they're kind of rickety and they're back and forth? Well, imagine like two 350, 400-pound guys get on each side of it and they shake it for about 3 to 5 seconds. That's what the Bradley feels like when an RPG hits it. But not just getting shaking back and forth. There's smoke and dust and you can smell the salt. And that's what it feels like for a rocket propelled grenade. Now, I ran over 40 IEDs, 40 improvised explosive devices on the road, wherever. That was what happened on those 2 missions throughout the course of the day. That was a pretty bad day, and you start to question things like, is this going to be my worst day, or are there going to be other ones to follow? Luckily, that was my worst day. But the point that I'm telling you through all this story about the Mother's Day, it's not about the mission. Of course, we went out there and, we ended up attacking and taking out some of the insurgents and doing this and doing that. Those stories are all there. The point that I want to give to you is that when I went out on the mission in the morning is I went with 2 guys and they went through all of that. In fact, one of them was 19 years old. He had a pregnant wife at home. And he went out that morning with me. The next guy was 21 years old. He was in the turret with me. And during that course of that morning mission, we had children shooting at us. We had women shooting RPGs. We had a lot of bad stuff happen. And in fact, that mission has been brought up so many times with these 2 guys that they directly link their post-traumatic stress disorder to that specific mission. That's how bad that day was. And that was only about an hour and a half of us going out there and getting attacked and all those things happen. We get back to the motor pool. And this is the part I wanted to bring up. The working with and mentoring people. We get back and the soldier that had his wife that was pregnant came out and he was just crying. I mean, he thought he wasn't going to live through that mission, which he had every right to. And then the other soldier that was with me, who was 21 years old, he just could not get over the fact of what was being done to us. The children or when, it got to him so bad. And the only thing I could do was just sit there and hug those guys in the middle of the motor pool in Iraq, 100-something degrees out. And I wasn't a mentor anymore. I was a father to these 2 guys when I was only 5 years older than them. It was tough. It was something I had never done before. I had never sit here and have to hug a grown man after going through a mission like that and realize how bad it really was for us. We had only been there at that point a little over a month. This was a month past that April 4th mission. That's it. And this is how bad it was already getting. And I knew at that point that I was always going to be a mentor to my junior enlisted guys. I always know I was going to do that for the rest of my life, because if they looked up to me at that point, they were always going to look up to me. And I spoke to one of them yesterday, and he told me this story. The Tactical Operations Centers, the top folks, they used to, on the radio, they would know what we were doing. So they understood what the missions were and everything that was happening. And these guys, when they knew my call sign at the time was Warrior White 1, when they knew Warrior White was going out on a mission, those guys used to go get their popcorn and used to go get their food. And even if they weren't on shift, they'd come out and they'd listen to the radios, because they're like, when you rolled out, we knew something was going to happen. I was like, the last thing I wanted to be was entertainment for people, or, hey, it's not Netflix, right? This is not some kind of comedy or whatever it was. But that was the reality of it. They just knew every time. And I think there was some kind of special paint on my vehicles. They always knew that I was going out and they were going to shoot at me, or they were going to try to blow me up every single time. I couldn't figure that one out. But when he told me that story and we were laughing about it, it kind of took me back to that whole point. When you lead people that are junior, or you have people on your team, it's not just for that moment. That's for a lifetime. I know with those guys, that's for a lifetime. And I know we don't always think in the corporate setting that I'm going to be a leader to that person for a lifetime, but you don't know that. You should always act as a manager, as a leader, like you are. Like you will always be a leader for that person whenever they need you. Building a team is awesome, and it's something that you continuously do. Working peer to peer, helping each other, listening, doing all those things right, that's another thing. But when you have people on your team, always act as if you're going to be the leader for them for the rest of their life. Even if they change companies, I've had people come up to me 10 years later and still call me to help them out. We don't work at the same company, we're not even in the same industry, but we worked together at one time and they were on my team. And this was in the corporate setting. So never think that even though you're in a corporate setting that goes away. Whether you're in the military, whether you're here, it doesn't matter. Be the best leader you can and take that with you at all times. Each day you have to build up your resiliency, and you think about how you have to build up this daily leadership, doing the small things right every day to be the right leader. It could be anything. It could be being on time. It could be responsive to emails. It could be responsive to texts. It could be doing those small things ends up being a great thing when you're doing the daily leadership. That's the way I like to think of it. A lot of people got awards. A lot of people got accolades through our deployment, and they deserve them. In fact, I think every single person there deserved even tons more medals for what we did. It was a lot. But the greatest thing that I ever received, the greatest award that I ever got, was the last day that we had a battalion formation, and as we're getting ready to kind of disperse in that August of 2005, and guys weren't going to see each other again for a while, I had one of my senior non-commissioned officers come up to me. He had been in for over 15 years. He had worked with a lot of different officers. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he salutes me, and he says, "You're the best officer I've ever worked with." And I salute him back, and he about faces and walks away, and I've never seen him since then. We've talked, but that moment to me is leadership. It wasn't about the Bronze Star Medal. It wasn't about other awards or accolades. It was about doing the right thing as a leader every chance I could. And when somebody says something to you like that, you take that with you for the rest of your life. When you're a leader or you're a manager of people, you never know how you're really going to affect them for life. You just don't. But if you can affect them in that manner, that they walk away from you and say, "You're the best manager I've had. You're the best leader you're the best officer I've ever worked with." That's the biggest award that I've ever achieved, and I still take that with me to this day.